Elissa, and good afternoon, everyone. Really looking forward to this presentation, and I have the pleasure of introducing Elissa Williams. Before I do, I'd just like to introduce M&T Bank and myself. I'm the local branch manager in Darien. We help really make a difference in our communities, working with small businesses, individuals, families, households. And it's important to us to develop really strong partnerships with awesome organizations like HAYVN. So I'm going to introduce Elissa. She actually joined M&T Bank 20 years ago as part of the bank's management development program. Following completion of the program, she spent 5 years working in the commercial bank operations as an operations manager and project analyst. Elissa moved to Treasury management in 2006, where she's currently responsible for all Treasury management, merchant services, and commercial card sales and support activities for M&T's middle market, commercial real estate, private banking, non-for-profit, auto floor plan, and government clients in the Connecticut market. Elissa graduated from Bowdoin College, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in mathematics. She also has her MBA in finance and marketing from Fordham University's Graduate School of Business. Elissa lives in Reading, Connecticut with her husband and 2 sons, and is also one of the leading members of our Women's Interests group at the bank. Elissa, the floor is yours. I'm happy to introduce you, and thank you so much, everyone.
Well, thank you, Andrew. That was a big introduction, giving everyone my lengthy history at M&T. Next month, I will be here 20 years, so I will get a plaque and a gift or something for, believing in the green, the whole time. So anyway, welcome. Thank you. I put together a slide presentation on the topic of fraud. And then a little bit towards the end, we'll discuss sort of a bigger picture, sort of all things Treasury management. So as the introduction said, my title is Treasury Management Consultant. Fraud is sort of a topic that's really catchy. People are really interested in it. You want to learn about it. But I think bigger picture in terms of banking, it's important to also think about sort of your whole banking practice as a business owner, how you collect your money, what you do with it while you have it, and then how you, process your payables when you need to pay your own bills. So we call that the payment cycle. So I'm going to touch on that at the end as well, because I think it adds value for everyone. So I'm going to share my screen. I practiced this, so hopefully, here we go. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, good. I see the thumbs up. So this morning for a little while, we'll talk about fraud facts and payment solutions to optimize your business. I think we'll start with the fraud component, as that's, interesting. It will give you some good things to think about for your business, as well as, making sure that where possible, you are implementing the proper controls and thoughts around what fraud would mean for you. So to get started, how do I go to the next slide? How come it's not going? Sorry, apologize, it's not going to there we go. Okay, so the couple of things that we're gonna talk about, common types of fraud, just in case you might not be familiar with the terminology that's sort of spoken of in the industry at the bank. And there's more, I'll highlight the ones that we see most often working with our business clients. A few statistics, not to scare anyone, but really just to drive home the point in a concrete way that this is really prevalent, and it's not just something that happens here and there. On the commercial side of the bank, where I spend most of my focus, and I think Andrew would agree on the retail and smaller business side, that we see this just about every day amongst our clients. And so it's not something that we like to take lightly. So we're going to focus a little on the statistics just to show you what's happening. And then I'll wrap up with a few minutes talking about the cash or payment cycle and the services, and from a banking perspective, that can help with each of the steps along that cycle. So I put a big exclamation mark. It's just really to make the point that, these things are serious, that you should proceed sort of with caution around the concept. But to get started, something that we see in our clients' experience, we hear from it at least on a weekly basis, is called executive impersonation. And what this means, and maybe also you've heard the term of like business email compromise, something like that. But what it really means is that a fraudster, might hack an email, or not even hack, send an email appearing to be you know, the CEO or the CFO of a company. Or if it's a smaller business, you might have 2 or 3 people in the office, and someone might be presenting themselves as the owner. And they're asking usually for quick action on something financial related. So they're saying, you know, I'm traveling for work, I'm not accessible at my computer, I need you to wire this money right now to ABC company, and here's the wiring instructions. And what happens is, because you think the email is from the owner of your business and you want to be the responsible employee, you act on it quickly, thinking that really was John Smith that sent me that email, and it really is an urgent business need. So I'm going to contact the bank, or I'm going to use my online platform, and I'm going to initiate this transaction. Well, what happens sometimes is, you know, you don't slow down enough to actually look closely or realize that that may or may not have in fact been who you thought the email was from. So what we suggest sort of in these instances, and I listed phone here because sometimes things happen over the phone. You get a phone call from who you think is someone at your company that may or may not actually be them, right? And, you know, maybe they're calling from a different number because they're traveling. There's lots of things here where fraudsters are looking for vulnerabilities, right? They're looking for you to be feeling like you're under pressure and, you know, taking an action based on that. And so relating to executive impersonation, for instance, like if at M&T you initiate a wire and we identify it as going to somewhere where you don't typically send wires, or where you don't, or it's a dollar amount of a wire that you don't typically send, you know, we do have some controls in our back office that are tracking your activity and looking for things like this. It might prompt a callback, right, to verify the transaction. And one of the questions we're going to ask is, did you receive these instructions for this transaction via email, right? Because a lot of times these things over email, it's not typically how someone might correspond. If you're working side by side in an office, you don't usually email each other and say, or email your coworkers and say, you know, process this transaction. We always suggest like speaking to them, verifying for sure that they are who they are. So it's just sort of something to be aware of. And the fraudsters are very good about, let's say your email address has, you know, an R and an N in it side by side. And this is something you might not even think of. If you type an R and then you type an N, it actually looks like an M, right? So there's ways to manipulate an email address if you're a fraudster to make it still look like what it was, but you use different letters to produce it and it's actually fake. So there's a lot of little nuances that people use so that you're sort of easily fooled. And rightfully so, because you're not expecting it. So we like to make, you know, sure that any transactions that are done, if the origination of those is an email or a phone call from someone you're not 100% sure of, that you take the extra step. Because something like a wire, once the money leaves M&T or your respective bank, the only way to get that money back is if the recipient of those funds agrees to return the money. And if you're a fraudster, you're not going to agree because you've already gotten the money on the other end and you're long gone. You're not going to agree to return the funds. And so, you know, these are things that people need to really be aware of. Like wires are, you know, are the ones where the chance to recover the funds is, you know, very small. So I'll move on. That's a lot on executive impersonation and emails, but I think it's really important because those are the kinds of things that we see very frequently. ACH debit fraud, what this means is somebody uses a business account number or even a personal account number to pay a bill, right? And I think the simplest example here is to think of me, Elissa Williams, needing to desperately pay my personal credit card bill or my personal cell phone bill, and I don't have any money. But I worked for ABC company and they gave me a payroll check. And what do I have on the payroll check? I have their bank account number and their routing number. That's exactly what's needed for me to make a pay by phone payment on my credit card bill or my phone bill. So I call up Verizon Wireless and I say, this is Elissa Williams. I'm gonna pay by phone my cell phone bill. And what do? I give them, you know, ABC company's bank account number and routing number. There's no verification by Verizon that the account number and routing number that are given to them for the pay by phone payment are in fact Elissa Williams' bank account. They're like, thank you, Ms. Williams, we appreciate your payment. Your balances now reflect zero, right? And off I go. It's going to take a few days or even longer for ABC company to realize that they didn't initiate this debit that is now posted to their account to pay my personal bill, right? And we see this a lot because checks are out there, checks are exchanged, checks are moved, checks are touched by third parties. It's very easy to commit this type of fraud. So in this particular case, the best thing to do is be diligent, right? Look at your bank account, personal or business, very frequently, at least on a daily basis, right? Because if you realize 2 weeks from now that there was a debit that shouldn't have been there, we'll go through our process and try to return it and try to recoup the funds for you, but there's not a guarantee of that. And in the meantime, you don't have those funds, right? So the best thing to do with something like this is if you have a debit that's not your own, notify your financial institution sort of ASAP, right? Don't tell us that, oh, gee, I'm 2 months or 3 months behind reconciling my bank account, and now I've uncovered these fraudulent debits. Because what happens is people, their fraudsters are smart. If the one debit goes through, they're gonna try it again. They're gonna be like, wow, that worked. What other bill can I pay, right? And so it's not usually a one-time thing. Usually, if your account, once it's compromised, it could happen, several different times. The next thing is check fraud, and that can happen in a few different ways. One, you can alter a check. You can make a check out to Andrew. I could check his mailbox and get his check, and I could change it to Elissa Williams, and I could deposit in my account. And you won't figure that out until Andrew comes and calls up and says, I didn't get my check. And they're going to say, but it cleared my bank. And then you're going to look at it and you're going to realize, well, it did. It cleared, the bank that you wrote it from, but it was deposited to me and not Andrew, right? So that stuff happens. It also happens that fraudulent checks are just created. It's very easy to go to somewhere like Staples or even order the check stock online. People probably are less likely going to Staples these days, but go and buy blank check stock. And just like I said before, any check that's in circulation, you have all the information you need on the bottom of that check to go home and print your own, right? So if you have a business check that comes to you because someone is paying you, all it takes is that information from the bottom of the check to print your own and write fraudulent checks on another business's or personal account. It's very easy to do it. And then you can, you could be desperate for a bill. You could, need to pay someone, or there are these schemes. You contact someone, and sometimes elderly, and you say, I'm gonna, mail you this check for something, deposit it, and then wire me back all but $1,000 or something. You keep 1,000 and you wire me back the other 9,000, right? And then, there's all these schemes around check fraud. So similarly to the ACH debit fraud, it just means to be diligent. You need to be diligent. You need to be checking your account, looking for check numbers that are out of check range, looking for things that are like duplicate check numbers. And if you have the ability to look at the images on your checks, you would also notice if they've been altered in any way. So, and then the last two, phishing and ransomware, these are things where you might receive an email that with a link that says something like your password's about to expire, please, click on this link and enter in this information to reactivate your account or reactivate your online access. And what they're doing is trying to use an email to get you to share personal information. And sometimes it's related to, please verify your date of birth, please verify the last few digits of your account number, please verify. And I think something that's very important is that the bank would never correspond with clients in such a way. So we're never going to ask you to verify things in this manner. If it looks like it's coming from a bank, it's not a legit correspondence. And just, you need to be aware of what links you're clicking on and what information you're providing from an email from an unknown source. And then lastly, we've had a few instances, unfortunately, at least in the commercial bank over the years, where people have clicked links on the internet, and what happens is the ransomware means that your computer it gets hacked in a way that your files are locked and you no longer have access to any of your financial information or bank files in general until you pay the fraudsters some money, right? So they hack into your computer and install this software on there, and they will only unlock it and give you the code if you pay money. And so, you know, these things, this just goes back similarly to phishing. Beware of what emails you're opening. If you don't know who it's from, then don't click on any links or open up any attachments. So those are not like direct fraud necessarily in the sense that someone's stealing money, like with a wire fraud or with an ACH fraud, but they go along with fraud because they can lead to compromise of financial information. So moving on to the next slide. I have a few statistics here, and I've put the link at the bottom, or not the link, but the source at the bottom. If you really are interested in more details, the AFP online, there is a really interesting, much more lengthy article, sort of all about fraudulent transactions at the bank, or not at the bank, but in the industry, as they found out in a survey of between 500 and 600 business clients, and the type of fraud that they've experienced, and such. So what the chart on the left details out are some percentages in relation to the types of fraud that is seen. And business email compromise, you know, which could be executive impersonation. It could be a hacker hacking into your email, but sometimes it's, you know, somebody pretending to be someone that they're not, is, you know, a very popular one. Outside individual, you see here a forged check or a stolen card. I think you all are aware that you need to be careful if you're like at a gas pump with your debit card or your credit card, right? There's people that are stealing those card numbers. That's a little bit outside of this presentation, but it can happen. I've had my debit card number stolen in purchases made in the West Coast, and I'm in Connecticut, right? It can happen. So that stuff is very prevalent. And then account takeovers, third-party outsourcers. So it's touches on the fact that of the businesses that were surveyed, these are the percentages that experienced these type of events during the year. So this is fairly high, 62%, right? That's a big percentage of people that have, and it doesn't mean that they had fraud, but it was attempted, right? So some, you know, someone tried to commit fraud against them. And so it's sort of, it's a little alarming, but I think it makes the point that you need to be diligent and you need to be on top of your banking, right? We all work hard for the money that our businesses earn, and we want to make sure that we're protecting it. And then the last point in the corner here is that accounts payable and payroll departments are the most common targets within organizations. And the reason for this is because these are the departments that are dispersing money, right? So accounts payable is the one who is sending out payments, who is cutting checks. And payroll, something that's interesting about payroll, and we've had an example here, is that some, you know, like a common hack related to payroll, not a common, but one we've seen a few times, is someone pretending to be an employee. So let's say I work at M&T, but I call up M&T Bank HR and I give them new direct deposit instructions for my payroll over the phone. And they take those instructions and they change their database to my new bank account information without verifying that that's legit, okay? But they make the change. Then what happens? The next time I get paid, my direct deposit goes to that new bank account and new routing number. Well, lo and behold, do they know that it was actually Andrew's account, right? And and then he got my paycheck. So there's simple things like that like you need to verify with the actual individual or have them come and do these kind of changes in writing. It's a little harder now because of the virus, but you need to have sort of secondary verifications on things like that. Like you might not think about it. You might be like, oh, I know Sally. I talk to her all the time. She called and says she's changing banks from Chase to Wells Fargo. And then what happens? It really wasn't Sally, but now Sally's paycheck went to Wells Fargo and her money's gone, right? And she didn't get paid and she's upset. And so like, there's a lot of ways that the fraudsters, they're sort of one step ahead all the time, like a creative way to think. I would never think that someone would change my direct deposit instructions and try to steal my paycheck, right? But we've seen it happen, and we've seen it happen like around bonus time because people know executives or managers are going to get big bonuses. So let's try to be a fraudster and change their banking deposit instructions right before bonus payout, because then I'm going to get a big chunk of money if I'm the fraudster, right? So you have to like think about what this means. And regardless of business size, if you have any employees that are working for you or with you, you need to be prudent around how you correspond with them and the verification steps that you take, because you don't want to send money to the wrong place and you don't want to have to try to get it back. So I can pause for questions. I have a couple more slides. If anyone wants to unmute or ask in the chat box, if I can find the chat box. So probably unmuting would be better.
Yeah, I think Teresa had asked a question. I kind of wanted to add to that, like, you know, the long-term plans for eliminating checking, and like, what services do you recommend to use instead of checks?
So I think that probably the best thing to do instead of writing checks is to convert those check payments to direct deposit. So business to business, businesses can pay each other electronically, right? So, or you can pay an individual with a direct deposit. So you think, like, we use the term ACH, and probably the most common application of it is payroll, right? A business pays their employees with a direct deposit. That is happening via ACH. So that same type of payment that can pay you and can pay me can also be used for a business to business transaction. And so that, first of all, there's a lot of pluses to that. One is it saves a lot of time, it saves expensive check writing, it saves signing of the checks, it saves a lot of the administrative work around the physical check process. And there are dual controls that can be placed on it in terms of, you know, an initiation of a payment similar to a wire and an approval of the transaction before the money is released. So if you have staff or an accounts payable person, you can have dual controls around that, similar to check writing. So that eliminates the check being out there in the same vein. And then also, depending, you could also pay with a corporate credit card, depending on what bills you're needing to pay, and if the recipient of the funds will take payment with a credit card. So really, there's checks, wires, and ACHs, and credit cards as the biggest means of payment. And definitely there's a migration from check writing to electronic forms of payment, which are ACHs primarily, or credit card transactions. Wires can be used, but they're more expensive. So they're not, you're not really.
Sorry, I've just been seeing trends in like with using Venmo or Veem or Stripe or things like that.
Mm-hmm. So you can do those too, like a real-time payment transaction. And on the larger commercial side, sort of not there yet, we have real-time payments, which sort of are, you know, along the vein of a real-time ACH. I apologize, my phone is ringing. For smaller businesses, there are those capabilities now where you could pay someone, you know, immediately, like with a Venmo or a Zelle, or, you know, a quick pay type of payment, maybe through, you know, Chase has quick pay or something. There's different banks have different names for the similar tools. And there are some rules around those that you just need to make sure that you understand. You know, when you send the money, when it's received, right? Like I don't think that there are the same rules around the ability to, if you paid someone in error, like, you know, you just need to familiarize yourself with, you know, the rules around those and your ability to take your money back if you paid the wrong person. You know, personally, I did that once. I had a lady that was cleaning my house and I paid her in Venmo, but there was so-and-so -1 and so-and-so -2, and I paid the wrong person $75, right? And so, and you can try to recall it, right? And you can put a request for the money back. Well, the person was happy to have my $75 and never returned it. But Venmo reimbursed me back because they have a policy around, you know, if the person won't respond after a certain amount of time, we'll make you whole and then we'll go after them ourselves for the $75. But you just need to understand the rules around the real-time things because you don't want to be vulnerable. And I can't speak to, you know, every bank's process around that right now, but you're right. Venmo and Zelle, they're becoming more popular. Yep.
Elissa, to your point about Venmo and Zelle, I've used Venmo. We used to use it at the chamber. I found it actually horrible. It's very little tracking, and it was, early Venmo. And I wouldn't recommend using Venmo. But these quick pay systems, are they third parties that banks sort of partner with, or do you have your own systems? And if it's a third party, how do you manage security with that? There's this whole gray area there. Well, for instance, Apple Pay as well. And I know we could go on forever, so just a quick response.
So they're not, like, M&T doesn't own them or have a partnership. Like, we have a partnership, for instance, I guess, in the sense that I'm enrolled with Zelle with my M&T bank account, right? So I can send money via Zelle to my husband's account at Bank of America, and he's enrolled also. And so we're participants, I suppose, is probably the best thing to say, in some of these networks. M&T, for instance, has what we call real-time payments, and there's some more detailed information in those, sort of $1.75 to send it, for instance. And you can include invoice information, and you can include other pertinent business details that you don't necessarily include on a Venmo transaction. If you send Venmo, they do have like a field where they want you to say what it's for. Like, you could say bagels for breakfast, $25, and you could send it to me, but that's sort of more meant for person to person interactions. It's not really a business type of setup, right? But so I think it's evolving because the world is moving more towards electronic transactions. People want to be paid faster. People want to be paid immediately. And so I think you're still in the infancy of getting these things to a higher level of sophistication.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I think you have a couple more slides. I don't want to take.
I do. I will. These are the next ones will be faster. So really quickly, I've touched on a lot of these points here, how you can best protect your business, right? Regardless of business size, it's really be vigilant. Don't be too comfortable or vulnerable, right? So the simplest thing here is look at your account information on a daily basis. And if you can't do it on a daily basis, do it on a every other daily basis. And another thing, a lot of banking platforms have the ability to set up alerts for certain types of transactions. So if you can't look at it all the time, set yourself up to get text alerts, email alerts of certain type of activity that come onto your account. So then if you see something that you don't recognize, you can then log in and investigate further. So it's really, you need to be on top of your own banking activity and familiar with what you've done. And that way you can realize quickly if something doesn't look correct. And then the next slide here are a couple of bullet points about bank provided services that can be used to mitigate the risks, right, of some of these fraud scenarios from happening. And there's services, and sometimes there's a fee, sometimes there's not, depending on your relationship at your bank. But really except for the, dual control just means that have more than one person involved in a process where you can. So if someone's initiating a wire, someone separately should be approving that wire. If you only have one business owner and you're in business for yourself, obviously you can't do that. You'll be the single person conducting transactions. But where possible, having more than one person in the process can make that more secure. And then the couple of, we sort of view them as insurance policies at the bank. So ACH Monitor or debit gives you control over who can debit your accounts electronically. Would provide you a notification if someone attempted to debit your account that you hadn't previously set up as authorized. So for instance, in the cell phone example I gave before, if you're ABC company and you got debited by Verizon for my phone bill, if you hadn't authorized Verizon to debit your account, you would receive notification that Verizon attempted to debit your account, and you would get to make a pay or return decision on that item, like the day that it happens. So you wouldn't be getting debited and then have to fill out an affidavit and go to the bank and dispute the transaction. On the spot, you would be notified, and then you could follow the process. You could reject it if it was not legitimate. And similarly, the next bullet, positive pay, is a very similar thing relating to checks. You tell the bank the checks that you write. As the checks are presented for payment, we're comparing the ones you've notified us with to the ones that have come in for presentment. If there's any discrepancy, a dollar amount, a check number, the payee, we're presenting the images to you for a pay or return decision. So it's basically, we're notifying you up front of the, of any suspect check items. And what that does is it also saves the hassle of having to go through the process of trying to collect funds back that have cleared fraudulently. And the last bullet is check block, which I think is important because sometimes you might have a business checking and a business savings. And you might have a lot of your money in the business savings because it's interest bearing and it makes sense to keep it there. Right now, I think I saw Andrew smiling, interest rates are very low, but either way, the concept is you're not writing checks on your savings account, right? But you have a lot of money in it. So if you put a service on like check block, what that would mean is if someone got your savings account number and they wrote a check on that account, the check would not clear because we have a block all checks set up on our side on that account. And so it's maybe you have several bank accounts for your business and one you write checks on and the other ones you don't. And so the ones that you're not writing checks on, it's a good way to protect your money by just knowing I have check block on that account. If anyone tried to write a check, the check would not clear. So moving. So I think that's, the last points I have sort of about fraud. There's a lot more I could say. I have already talked a lot. I think I will move on to the last 2 slides for a brief minute to talk about sort of the other things treasury management and where these sort of services relating to fraud sort of fit into the larger payment cycle. If anyone has a question first. And I apologize, on my shared screen, I don't see how I can see the chat. So that's why I didn't see your notes before. Okay. So I like this diagram because I think it is pretty succinct and can give you some thoughts on, how as a business owner, how you collect your money, what you do with your money while you have it, and then the different ways that you can make payments out. And obviously you see the turtles and the rabbits, and I think it's it's a good description of ideally what you'd like to do. You would, people that owe you money, you want to get paid right away, but the people that you want to pay, you want to potentially pay them slowly so that you can sit on your cash the longest. And certainly depending on your financing situations and, the interest rate environments, holding on to your money longer, it used to be more valuable. Right now, interest rates are very, very low across the board. So it's not quite the same, benefit as it was a few years ago, where if you held on to your money, you could put it in some interest earning vehicle before you made your payments out and come out ahead. So sort of what I do on a daily basis is work with our clients on all the things in this cycle, right? What do they need from their bank to collect their money? And then what services do they need, sort of information reporting? Maybe they need a scanner, maybe they need these fraud protection services. And then how do they make their payables out? So I think this diagram just is helpful in to understand, like, maybe, and it goes back to your question about the other ways that I could make payments, right? If I'm not going to write a check any longer, how else could I make that particular payment? And we're really seeing businesses, certainly with younger generations of, people in financial roles, moving away from check writing, right? But there's a big population of people in this country that still, conduct business only by check. And I think it's slowly changing, but it's still going to take a long time. So does anyone have questions? I won't go into detail on every one of these services, but I'm happy to address one if there's a question. No questions? Okay. And then I think the last slide that I have here is just goes back to that last diagram, sort of what you should be considering when you're evaluating, how you're doing things at your own particular business, right? What your goals are, and then your considerations for your various processes. Like, you want to be efficient, you want to save money and time, because we all don't have enough time. So if there's a way that you could make one of your banking processes more efficient, then, it's something to consider. And so that's what these things are listed here. Time, staffing, payment terms, costs, staffing, bank, float, bank fees, like what's the trade-off between using one service versus another, or doing one type of payment versus another type of payment. And sometimes the type of payment and the timing can affect, your pricing on things, if you're purchasing things, or if you're, so I think that's just about the end of the things that I had planned to discuss today. If there are more questions, I can certainly take them now, or I can, anybody can feel free to reach out to me directly, because the content shared, I mentioned M&T several times, but the concepts are, applicable regardless of your financial institution. So the, fraud happens regardless of what bank you're at, and sort of the concept of the payment cycle is very similar amongst every bank.